Welcome back to the StockTA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Steuer. Today, we're looking at a company that's hitting its stride in two of the most critical sectors for 2026, gold and copper. We're talking about Questcorp Mining, ticker QQCMF on the OTC. Please note this interview is being disseminated on behalf of Questcorp Mining. Just a few weeks ago, they launched a fully funded Phase 2 exploration program at their La Union project in Mexico, following a massive high-grade discovery. At the same time, they're generating fresh 3D models for their North Island copper project in BC. To walk us through the district-scale potential of these assets, I'm joined by Questcorp CEO Saf Dhillon. Saf, you've got two rig-ready stories and a very tight capital structure. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having us. Yeah, very excited to talk about the story, Questcorp Mining, and yeah, let's get at her.
Saf's going to share his screen here, and we're going to go through kind of the main points of their slide deck.
As you just mentioned, Kevin, we are a Canadian-based company. I'm based in Vancouver, British Columbia. We've got two assets. Questcorp Mining Inc. As Kevin, you mentioned, we're listed in Canada. QQQ is the ticker here. In the U.S., which it trades actually quite extensively, almost just as much as it does in Canada. Ticker in the U.S. is QQCMF. And of course, we've got a European listing based in Frankfurt, D910. Yeah, Kevin, we're about a less than 3-year-old IPO company. We started off with a very exciting project on Vancouver Island. It's actually grown quite significantly along with its neighbors, or should I say, really as a result of some extreme growth from one of our largest neighbors on Vancouver Island. That property is called North Vancouver Island Copper Property. It's basically right next to the old BHP Billiton copper mine, which at one point was one of the largest mines in Canada. And we sit right next to one of our largest neighbors, as I just mentioned, North Island Copper. I believe their ticker in Canada is NCX. They've grown their company through the drill bit, primarily through the drill bit, from sub $50 million market cap to well over $1 billion. When we actually signed our agreement to acquire this project on Vancouver Island, of course, they were nowhere near that size. So we're excited with their growth. I'm not saying, and nor will we ever get to anywhere, I think, with just the land package that we have, but we're excited to see what we've got, and we hope to have a drill bit turning on our property sometime later this year, if not very early next year. So our second property is the La Union project in Mexico. As I said, it's a very exciting property. It's much larger than our Canadian asset. And at the time, we were looking for something that's going to have really some meat on the bones and something that could potentially be a company maker. And I think we're getting pretty close to finding out the answer to that question. And with that, I just want to, touch through a couple of slides, if I may, Kevin. So again, just our Canadian ticker is QQQ. In the US, it's QQCMF. You can see the company is really focused on the two properties, North Island Copper, NICP, as we call it, which sits at the northern tip of Vancouver Island in the province of British Columbia. And then we also signed a definitive agreement to acquire the La Union project with Riverside Resources, which is another well-known North American Canadian-based mining company headed up by John Mark Stouty, or Dr. John Mark Stouty. He's got his doctorate in geology. They're a very successful project generator, and they've had a number of very successful spin-outs or breakouts, if you will. I think Riverside is probably at about a $20 million market cap, but they have successfully spun out a silver asset, which is now called El Capitan or Capitan Silver. I believe that's north of $100 million market cap. The time they did their spin out, it was probably one of their most prospective silver assets. And when we came along with our brand new IPO, Questcorp, and we were having discussions with Riverside, they were in the process, to our good fortune, looking at spinning out the La Union asset as it was their most prospective gold-focused project. And that's really how the nexus of the deal came together. We ended up signing an option agreement, which I'll touch base real quickly. But I think I'll just quickly show you a quick slide on where our project on the Vancouver Island is in Canada. That's us right here. As I said, it's a bit of a smaller property, but this property's been drilled historically. number of holes have hit copper in the past. It was lower grade, but it was still at shallow depths, less than 150 meters. I think you can make the outline. This is the northernmost port city called Port Hardy on Vancouver Island. This big teal claim block is our neighbors, as I mentioned earlier, North Island Copper. And then, of course, that's us in the red right here. And then the light green is the old site of the former BHP mine. And this area has really, really, grown in terms of activity, grown in terms of ounces in the ground, specifically with North Island Copper. And we're hoping, like I said, at some point that us, along with the other neighbors, are going to be maybe a little bit of an addition to their project. And that's why, like I said, we want to get the drill bit turning there, hopefully by the end of the year. So I think what investors primarily, when you're looking at a company, there's a couple of things that you want to look for. Of course, the horse, or in this case, the project. And I think that we've got two projects that potentially have the potential to not only add some, return on investment, but also I think with our La Union project, we got the real potential here with this asset to be, a project that turns this company into a household name or a well-known name, just kind of like North Island Copper has grown. That's what I think we're hoping for with the La Union project. So you want to look at the quality of projects that you got. B, you want to look at the management or the board that is actually running the company, or as they like to say in horse racing, you want to bet on the horse sometimes. Sometimes you want to bet on the jockey. We're hoping we have a bit of both here with this company. And then the third, I think, cog in the wheel, really, that's just as important as the other two pieces is really your cap structure. And if you take a look at our cap structure, when we came out to the IPO, within, I guess, 12 months, we had about 15 million shares issued and outstanding. We've done, two financings now to date, non-flow-through financings for hard dollars. We now currently sit at about approximately 100 million shares issued and outstanding. But the key thing is really where those shares are distributed or who is holding these shares. And I think this pie chart really gives you the visual that I think that really sends a powerful story. Of the 100 million roughly shares that are issued and outstanding, we really have more than 60% that's actually held by long-term investors, primarily US and European investors that actually have an eye on a 3 to 5 year window, say that they've kind of given us with their investment to grow the company. And this financing primarily, a majority of it was done actually at 6 cents Canadian, which was about a year and a half ago. And, the stock, I think, has hit a high as I think 47 cents Canadian. Mind you, that was only for a day or two. It just kind of shows you that with a little bit of buying where this stock can go. It's very tightly held for having 100 million shares issued and outstanding. Management directors, and of course, our JV partner or earn-in partner, Riverside, we own another 20% of that roughly 60. So it really leaves you only about 20% or 20 million shares that are kind of in the float or in retail hands. And I think that's really a key part of the story here, Kevin. And I hope that gives investors an idea to show that there is a firm belief in the management or the jockeys and the horse, or two horses in this case for our story. This is just kind of a quick chart from last June showing when we did the financing, prior to doing the financing, and then signing the deal with Riverside. And I think for a good couple of months, we hung around 18 to 20 cents. This is a Canadian price. Here's a quick little summary on the La Union project. I think a couple of the key points really are Riverside has had this project within their fold for roughly, it's been about 7 going on 8 years. Besides Riverside and the previous owners, there's been roughly about $2.5 million US spent developing the asset. And the key thing is just a small part of this asset of La Union historically has had past production. So even though the property's never been drilled until we actually acquired the asset, it actually produced about 50,000 ounces of high grade gold. And within that, the gold was ranging as low as 7 grams per ton to as high as 20 grams per ton. And of course, they also had some high grade silver and some lead and some zinc. Um, we ended up signing a deal with Riverside to acquire 100% of this property. It's a 4-year option. So essentially, we've got 4 years to earn in 100% of the property. We paid them 25,000 Canadian at the signing of the deal or the effective date, and we owe them 25,000 in the remaining 3 years. Next payment's not due till next year, and we also have to spend 5.5 million specifically on La Union in the ground. And I think today, don't quote me, I didn't do the math before this call, but to date, I think we've probably spent somewhere between 2.5 to 3 million, or we will by the time that this fully funded drill program, the next phase 2, is completed sometime this summer. And then coming back, to the option agreement, it was a 4-year option agreement, 100,000 Canadian cash and 5.5 million Canadian expenditures on La Union. And then by the time we own 100%, we would issue Riverside 19.98% of Questcorp shares. Currently, we've already advanced 9.9% of these shares. So in the end of the day, it's in both parties' interests. So now all of our interests are aligned, Riverside's, Questcorp, and of course our long-term shareholders. We're here looking to make a discovery. And if you look, we're focused in probably the most, if not the most prolific producing and highest grade province region within Mexico. It also happens to be one of the safest regions. Our project, if you can make out the bright red star right there in the middle of the map, we just sit basically a couple of hours drive south of the border with Arizona. And typically there's 2 ways you can fly down there. We've been to the property already twice. You can either fly in through Mexico City, fly into Hermosillo, or you can drive in from Scottsdale, Arizona, or from Phoenix. The other key point that I was going to add out is, if we had acquired this project on our own with no JV partner, not having Riverside, we'd have to build a team from scratch. I'm not a technical person. Of course, we have a technical based board and advisors, but having Riverside as a partner, I think is really beneficial. They've been around for 30 plus years in Mexico. John Mark is very fluent. He's a world-class geologist, and he's built a world-class team, and they're based really out of Hermosillo, which, again, I think it's going to be hard for you and your viewers to see, but that's the Gold Star. Sorry, the Gold Star is our property, and then Hermosillo is just about an hour and change to the southeast, just right here at the bottom of the map. You can see it. So that's the project. I think that's the company in a nutshell. We got 100 million shares issued and outstanding, and we've got 2 projects that are basically drill ready and hopefully about to be drilled in a 1-2 punch throughout the remainder of 2026.
No, that's a great overview. Thank you so much for walking us through that. So, you're in a position where gold is near all-time highs, and you're dealing with a copper supply crunch for data centers, for all kinds of different electrification things. How are you going to keep that momentum that you guys had earlier in the year? Like, you guys were a quadruple from basically Q3 to early in the year. How do you guys ride this momentum of this gold and copper bull cycle?
Well, Kevin, I think that's a good point. I think this the war in the Gulf, of course, has thrown a lot of uncertainty into the mix. But what it's also done is I think it's really cemented the demand and the need for electrification, right? And I think at the end of the day, I know this property's been focused on, the La Union property's been primarily focused on high grade gold, but we actually have encountered some silver. We've got lead, zinc, and then don't forget our copper property on Vancouver Island. So besides the need for having these electric or critical mineral type commodities, I don't think we've seen really the middle innings of the commodity bull run still. Gold has taken a bit of a breather, as I said, really because of, I think, the Gulf War. But at the end of the day, I think that what we're finding is globally, And globally and historically, the demand for precious metals as well as critical minerals, I don't think that demand is going to be slowing down anytime soon, or I don't think we're going to see, 3,000 gold again. I think that what current events are happening is just reinforcing the age-old adage. You take a look at all the governments and all the debt crises we're having globally, throw in the mix with the war again. You're talking about people really wanting to have tangible hard assets, access to, or having physical gold presence and access to owning precious metals, period. I think this demand, again, we're still maybe not the early innings, but we're still in the third or fourth inning. I don't think we're halfway through this ball game yet, Kevin.
No, and I would agree with that point. And with how you're structured share wise, I mean, gold has sold off. The market in general has just been kind of chaotic for the past 5 weeks, however long we've had this conflict with Iran and the Middle East in general going on. And you guys are only down 4% year to date. And I think that's a testament to how tightly held your share structure is, but also how you laid out your vision earlier of, this is kind of a 3-year play. So do you think you have, the right people in place and the right shareholders in place that this is the stock that where you guys are valued now, there's a lot of potential to the upside moving forward? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer that kind of almost in reverse. I think that there's plenty of upside. I think that we're just getting started. And in terms of, we've only completed 1,600 meters of drilling, Kevin. And this is a huge property. Most resources or most projects, you don't really have an idea of what's beneath the surface until, anywhere somewhere between the 10,000 to 50,000 meters. We've only drilled 1,600 meters. We've scratched the surface. And even with just scratching the surface, we're very excited. I think one of the best ways that John Mark actually put it, which really made it, how do you say it, wasn't quite eloquent, but it just really was very clear for me to understand. When I said to him, I go, John Mark, that's less than a gram per ton of gold. He said, Saf, but you don't get it. The best way to say is that, listen, we kind of have an idea where this mineralized zone is, where this potential structure is, the one that we were focused on. And he said the best way to put it is that first 1,600 meters, we drilled into the smoke. Our plan is now to potentially technically drill into the fire. And I think that's what the work is being done right now, so that the next phase of drilling, we're going to have a better shot of hitting something higher grade. In terms of shareholders and talent to the company, no, I think everything's always evolving. We've got great shareholders, but you know what? There's always more shareholders that are always like to step in as a company gets advanced. We have roughly 45 to 50 million warrants priced between the 10 and 20 cent range, that if we had investors with the deeper pockets and the ones, the institutional investors who really haven't been able to take a bite of this pie or apple yet, they can at some point, once we get some more liquidity, we got 100 million shares out, that if somebody wanted to accumulate a position of 10 million shares, they actually could, because it possibly is in the float. They couldn't have done that when we had 15 million shares out.
No, I think you guys are growing the right way. Like you're growing, you're scaling this company at the right pace for what they're drilling and what you're discovering. So this next round that you have drilling, when you talk about the fire, that's going to be this summer is your goal?
Plans are to hopefully have a drill bit turning in Mexico prior to summer. Yes.
Okay. So between now and, year end, what would you say is the biggest fundamental driver of this company?
I think we're going to have some more assays back from Mexico. And then I think the drivers are really going to be the results from Mexico. I think that gold is, I think now that we've seen a bit of a base here, a new bottom, I think that the macro of events are, I think, going to start having a bit more of a positive turnaround, just as we hopefully are going to have steady news flow coming out of both properties.
No, that's great. And for my listeners who want to find more about your company, where do they go to look?
Oh, come to the website, QQQ, Questcorp mining.ca. And of course, we've got a Twitter account and LinkedIn. I think they can sign on there. Or if they go to the website, just punch in their email address and we can have them on the database.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. That's it for today. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss our next CEO deep dive. Saf, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Kevin, for having us.